Hello, this is Tea Time Code, and today I'm going to be introducing you to Python. So this is just an introductory video, so I'm not going too in-depth. There will be follow-up videos going into more in-depth examples of some of the features and aspects of Python. But in this video specifically, I'm just going to be covering what is Python, why use it, the basic syntax, some of the best practices, and some IDE suggestions. So as always, grab a cup of tea, get comfortable, and let's get right into it. So, why use Python? So Python works on many different platforms, such as Windows, Mac, Linux, Raspberry Pi, and many more, essentially meaning that whatever platform you want to run your Python code on, it will most likely work. Python is a high-level language, meaning it is closer to basic English with some mathematical additions to it than it is to machine language, essentially meaning it will look a lot more like this, so a lot closer to English, than it will to this, which is obviously binary. Python also runs on an interpreter, meaning you can run and test code as soon as you write it, rather than, like some other coding languages, having to compile it every single time that you want to check your code, which makes testing significantly easier. So, let's go over some of the basic syntax. So what is syntax? Syntax in programming refers to the set of rules that define how code must be written for a specific programming language to be understood and run correctly by a computer. Think of it as the programming equivalent to grammar in normal English. So below I have two examples of some quite high level code. I have some Python and I have some C++. As you can see, although they both do the same thing, they both look very different. This is because the syntax, or the, in quotes, grammar, is different in both languages. So, when creating variables, you can use a mixture of letters, numbers, and underscores. You cannot have any spaces in your variable names, and it also cannot start with a number. It must start with a letter or an underscore. So, some valid examples are underscore name, person3, or Stephen underscore Smith. Some examples that wouldn't be valid is for user, age/name, or Stephen space Smith. Another thing to be aware of in Python is that it is case sensitive, meaning that capitalization matters. So Alex and Alex are not the same because one has a capital A and one doesn't. User underscore age and user underscore age are not the same because the U on the left is capitalized and U on the right is not. However, something like this would be correct. Although it is not good practice, every letter does match each side because it is a mixture of uppercase and lowercase. So this is what we're looking for, essentially meaning that you have to match both what the word is as well as the exact layout, so the uppercase and the lowercase and where everything is. Indentation and spacing is also an important bit of syntax to remember with Python, as Python uses spaces or tabs to group code. So you must indent the line after an if, for, while, a function, or anything else, for example. So, standard practice is to use 4 spaces for each level of indentation, or, commonly, you can also just tab in using the tab button on your keyboard. So, it would look something like this would be correct, whereas something like this would not be. You can also leave comments in your code. These won't run, but can be used to leave messages for other coders working on the same code, or for your future self, so you can remember what a certain section does. Always remember to explain why you're doing something, not just what you're doing. This helps you when you come back to look at your code. In Python, we use hashtags to leave comments. This below is an example of how a comment would look inside of Python. You also want to make sure you use clear, concise, and descriptive names for your variables. So, some examples of this would be user underscore age, student underscore math underscore grade, and passing underscore score. These are all variables that you can tell what they mean just by their name. However, if they look like this, so x, smg, or pa underscore sc, just from first glance you can't completely understand what these are referring to. An easier example to see this is in this. This is a function. Just from looking at it, you might be able to tell what each individual section does, but you can't tell overall what is meant to be happening. Whereas if you just change the function name and the name of the variables, it will look something like this. And suddenly it's much more easy to see what is meant to be happening. You can tell that the function calculates the total price and what each different variable does. So even if you don't know code, you will still most likely be able to figure out what this function does. So, when naming certain things, you will also want to follow specific naming conventions to make life easier. So for example, with variables, you want to use lowercase with underscores. An example of that would be user underscore name. Whereas with constants, you'll want to use all caps with underscores, like max underscore size. Obviously, I don't expect you to know what these are yet, but I will be going over them in a future video. We also have functions, which you'll use lowercase with underscores again, like calculate underscore total, and classes, which will use something called camel case, which is essentially no gaps and no underscores. It's just every new word uses a capital letter. So in this example, we have user profile. Another example of best practices is that you'll want to use 4 spaces for each level of indentation, as I talked to you before. But you can also use tab. The main thing overall is to make sure that whatever spacing practice you use is to make sure it keeps consistent across all of your code. So if you use 4 spaces, make sure you always use 4 spaces. If you use tab, make sure you always use tab. If you want to use 10 spaces, for example, make sure you always use 10 spaces. Obviously, that's a bit of an extreme example, but the main thing to remember is to keep it consistent. You will also want to keep your code dry. This essentially means you do not want to be repeating yourself. So if there is a specific section of code you keep repeating, then turn it into a function. Whereas the example below is quite a basic example of this, this becomes much more prevalent when you have sections that are repeating of 5 lines of code or 10 lines of code or even more than that. So instead of having to keep repeating those 10 lines of code, you can just repeat the one function call and have it run that 10 lines of code again without having to rewrite those 10 lines of code, which saves you time and makes everything a lot easier. So overall, you can always refer to PEP 8, which is Python's official style guide, with how they recommend you lay out and format your code. I will be leaving a link to this in the description if you want to check it out. It's quite extensive, but it is very clear in what you should and shouldn't do. So now that we've covered that, I'm going to give you some IDE suggestions. So first of all, an IDE stands for Integrated Development Environment and is the recommended way for you to write your code. So obviously the first suggestion I'm going to give is Python's own IDE. It is simple, lightweight and basic. This will be good for a lot of people and can be perfectly fine for starting out, and it is guaranteed to not overcomplicate anything. Below is an example of what the IDE looks like. It's clean and simple. Another suggestion is also one of the most popular alternative IDEs, which is Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio Code is also lightweight and powerful and has excellent Python support with many extensions you can add to enhance your coding experience. So below, once again, is an example of what the IDE looks like. As you can see, it can get slightly more complicated than Python's own IDE, but in the long run, it can help you with organizing your code, and when you get a bit more deeper into things, using some of the extensions and such to help you along the way. However, in the end, you can take my advice into account, but you need to do your own research and use whatever you think works best for you, because in the end, you're the one that's going to be coding in it, and you're the one that's going to be using it. So it doesn't matter what I think. In the end, it only matters what you think. So, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe if you think this was helpful, and feel free to check out my other videos, as I'll be releasing more videos on Python and some of the more complicated sections of Python, as well as many other things. So if you like it, feel free to stick around. Cheers.